advertising needs to really affect or even influence behavior change. And I think all of us can get behind that, right? Because it makes advertising feel like it actually has a real cause in our lives. Now, I will admit, no matter how many exercise apps I download or how many times my doctor tries to tell me to modify and make better an active lifestyle that I seem to somehow be pushing off, even though I know it's good for me, I don't take their advice. Why is this?
Yeah, welcome to being human.
No, there's going to be an answer. It's something in my brain. Tell me.
So, anyway,
I don't know if anyone else can relate to that.
Yeah. So as a behavioral neurologist, I'm very interested in what changes behavior. And there's a lot of different factors that go into it. If you want to read more about it, one kind of specific model is called the social cognitive theory of behavior change. But it ties into this prediction making that our brain does and the outcomes that your brain is constantly monitoring all the time about the environment around you to kind of make rules about the world and decide what to act on. So I can give you an example of what that might look like. So I did research a few years ago out in the middle of the Amazon rainforest with a group called the Kaiapó. So this is a group out in central Brazil that has kind of decreased kind of the minimal amount of contact with others, and they live on a watershed. And that watershed, where they get their water and their fish from, was contaminated back in the 70s. By gold miners, where they got methyl mercury into the water. And so as they were eating the fish and drinking the water, they were getting a buildup of this mercury in their brains and nerves. It was causing all sorts of toxicity. They were being poisoned, essentially. And so the public health officials kind of stormed in and said, don't drink the water, don't eat the fish. It's poisoned. But they kept on drinking the water and eating the fish. And I thought this was a really interesting question. Why is it that even though they can see that people are being poisoned by this, that they're continuing to drink the water and eat the fish? It was only until the Kaiapó themselves, people within their community, started to say, don't drink the water, don't eat the fish, that they actually started to pay attention to the public health messages. And this is something that you see in lots of different groups over and over again. At the University of Pennsylvania, they did this one study for diabetics. So they took people who were out of control diabetics, who had recently been able to reduce their blood sugar levels, and they paired them up with people who had yet to reduce their blood sugar levels. And all they said was, talk to each other maybe once a week, once a month at least. And over the course of 2 years, just having a conversation, the blood sugar levels decreased in that group. So there's a combination of kind of what your expectations are of the outcome. So what do you expect your behavior is going to lead to? Your expectations of how much control you have over the decisions that you make. And also, there's a social aspect to it as well, kind of this trust aspect to it. So people that you relate with the most are people that you're going to trust because they're essentially, you identify with them. So that it's almost like they are consistent with your map of who you are. So if this information is coming from someone who is like you, you're likely to trust them because there's that fidelity of information. I'm always right, so you, who looks like me, is always going to be right. And that happens without us realizing it. We begin to really perceive our own identity kind of very early at about 8 months, where we look in the mirror and we know that that's us in the mirror and not some stranger in the mirror. There's some really cute studies where they paint a little dot in kids' heads. And it's only until after 8 months that they actually realize that the dot is on them and not on some stranger in the mirror. But as those kind of connections form and our brain kind of shapes itself, we begin to have a map of who we relate with. And oftentimes it's people who we physically look like. And people who we can kind of associate as much of things kind of that we have in common. So similar to the Kaiapó situation, it was only when Kaiapó told Kaiapó about things that they actually listened to it. And it's kind of similar with word of mouth. Are you more likely to trust someone who looks, acts like you, does what you do, or someone who looks nothing like you, does completely the opposite things like you? You have to kind of build that confidence, but you already have this rule in your head that people who are very much like you, who kind of have the same background of you, are going to have a higher reliability of information, so you're likely to trust that information.
Does this mean it's possible that Facebook could actually be influencing my choices around what movies I see, what electronics I buy, what health activities I take?
I mean, it even influences the way that our brain activity. So in our brain, the way that we perceive other people, we have what's called a mirroring system. Some of you may have heard of this, but essentially, as you're watching somebody else move or get touched or experience pain, you are recreating that experience in your brain, most of the time unconsciously. And if you look at the brain, you see like touch areas in the brain that's becoming more active that correspond to the people that you're looking at. That is highest, that activity is highest when the person you're looking at looks like you. It is not as high as when you're seeing someone who you care about, someone that you love, a spouse, a family member, and it's the least with people who look nothing like you, who are complete strangers to you. But what's really interesting is that it's not static, meaning that the more you're able to focus on how you relate with this person who doesn't look like you, who doesn't act like you, the more that activity kind of gets back to kind of closer to that me kind of level. And we see that with very simple things like just kind of a meditation type of exercise where you just think about all the things that the person has in common with you, to virtual reality experiences. If I were to put you in a virtual reality game where you are in a skin of someone who doesn't look like you, let's say you're a young white woman, but in the virtual reality game you are an older black man, and you look at yourself in the mirror, after the virtual reality game, you're more likely to have positive thoughts for that outgroup than before the virtual reality experience.
That's fascinating.